Good morning, everyone. How's everybody doing? All right. Having a good week? Okay. So this morning, we're going to spend a little bit of time actually connected to the previous conversation, but what do we need to do from a technology perspective, a technology development perspective? So the Space Technology Mission Directorate at NASA has recently gone out and gathered a lot of input from academia, industry, NGOs, AIAA even gave them input on what are the technology needs and try to sort it out and get a priority. So Prasun Desai, the Deputy Associate Administrator for STMD, if you'll come on out. Prasun and Alesyn, I forgot Alesyn's last name already. Pardon me? Lowry, sorry. Alesyn Lowry will be here and they will take you through what the STMD folks, the process that they went through, and give you some insight into the results and where it stands. And then from there, we'll turn it into Q&A. So remember to use the QR code and put those questions in to the app, and we'll have a great discussion. So Prasun, all yours, sir.
So I think we're going to do it seating it down.
Okay, however you want to do it.
So good morning, everyone. Pleasure to be here. Alesyn and I will give you an understanding of where we are in our planning process at Space Tech. And you know, we've earlier in the year kind of talked about how we're going to go forward in taking the organization based on you know, the 14 years that we've been around, what we've learned through that process, what has worked well, how we can improve on those, build off of those, and the areas that we've had some, what we think some maybe challenges, how we can try to evolve things to smooth out those things and make it a much more of an efficient process going forward. So today, we're going to give a little bit understanding of high level. I'm going to talk a little bit about where we are and some of the organizational aspects that we're considering. And then Alesyn, I'm going to hand it off to Alesyn, and she's going to talk about the shortfall and then the survey and the prioritization process that we've embarked on a couple of months ago with you all's help, which we first and foremost want to say thank you for all your participation on that. So with that, I want to go to the that's me, actually. Go to the next chart. Okay, so you know why Space Tech has really been here to be the national tech base for civil space. You know, developing the next generation of technologies in terms of the ground development, demonstration in flight, and ultimately infusion, right? We want to get to the infusion aspect so that they get implemented and used in all sorts of missions and architectures going forward, right? And what we've always looked to do was make these technologies more transformational as opposed to incremental upgrades, right? So we're looking to see how we can change the state of that capability so systems are more reliable, more capable, and more cost-effective going forward for a sustainability aspect of things, right? And so we've been doing that for over the last 14 years, and you know, I'm going to highlight a few of these just recent examples of where we have made strides in there, and then build off of that in the rest of the presentation. But it's there to advance, you know, this U.S. space technology innovation, given that it is a much more of a global competitive environment than when we stood up 14 years ago. So certainly a lot has changed, and a lot has changed because of you all in the audience with the amazing space sector that's so vibrant in the US right now. Encourage technology-driven economic growth. So in partnership with a lot of you how can we build on the capabilities of the whole space sector? One, to develop the capabilities that we need at NASA, but also the larger overarching space enterprise to try to push further and further into the solar system. And in doing that, inspiring the next generation, because we're only going to be able to make these great strides and new developments by having the technical know-how of the next generation to help foster these new ideas and innovations that are necessary to enable the capabilities that we're looking to put in place. see, there we go. So here are some recent examples of some of these transformational technologies that we have developed and are actually in flight demonstration or near it as we speak. So I'll start off with just a couple of them on this chart. The D-Space optical communication. It is right now flying on the SICE spacecraft, pretty far out in the solar system, passing Mars's orbit. It is to demonstrate optical communication capability at millions of miles from Earth. We've demonstrated it along this flight path at Psyche from Earth all the way out to where it is right now. Amazing capability, amazing demonstrations that have occurred. We've been able to well past 10 million miles for doing pinpoint optical communication from that distance to two ground stations in California. The precision required for pointing purposes to be able to do that, pretty amazing, and that capability is demonstrated and working extremely well. We're looking forward to the next IM launch, Intuitive Machines launch number 2, where we're looking to demonstrate capabilities on the lunar surface. Prime 1 drill to better get a sense of the characterization of the surface that at the landing site location-wise to help some of the ISRU knowledge that we need as we go forward to build those capabilities. We're demonstrating a communication system, an LTE capability on the lunar surface. As we put more and more systems on the surface, they're going to need to be able to communicate with each other as they're going around doing various different things. So we're doing this partnership with Nokia to be able to do a demonstration of communications on the lunar surface there. And then a hopper to try to go further away from doing science capabilities to show how far we can get and still be able to communicate and go inside craters even to be able to understand what it sees and then be able to come out and go to other places. So those two going there. And then one more I will highlight on this chart is solar propulsion. It is the 12.5 kilowatt power thrusters that are going to power the Gateway into its orbit around the moon. It's in finishing up qual testing right now in many ways, and so it is pretty much ready for incorporation and integration into the power and propulsion element for the system that's going to propel Gateway to its orbit. A couple of more on this slide. A couple of the areas that we're still looking to push the envelope on is cryofluid management. As we push further and further into the solar system, we're going to be looking towards trying to be able to store various propellants for longer periods of time. And we have a number of partnerships with industry to make that happen, right? And then I will highlight Capstone that is in around the moon right now, doing a lot of navigation and communication, precision navigation timing, PNT, for precursor to Gateway as it gets into that orbit. So helping to understand what that environment looks like. So that is going on very at the moment as we speak now, and has been very successful. The last two quickly, we're almost ready to deploy the Advanced Composite Solar Sail System. It is in orbit right now, going through checkout, and that demonstration hopefully will start commencing in the next few weeks here once the whole checkout process is completing to try to be able to do a technology demonstration on a much larger scale for a solar sail. And then lastly, looking at advanced propulsion capabilities, nuclear thermal propulsion with the Draco demonstration that we're in partnership with DARPA to be able to go and do some of these advanced capabilities that we all need as we push further into the solar system. Now, over the last 14 years, we've been very much in a technology readiness level segmented program structure. Here on this chart kind of shows you how those programs have been binned in various technology readiness levels, starting from low set of programs in low TRL, a set of programs in mid TRL, and a set of programs in higher TRL. So what we've learned through that whole process over the last 14 years, even though we've made some great strides in a lot of the technology demonstrations we have done, is that we can do things better and overcome some of the internal challenges, roadblocks that we're seeing on how to make these things more smoother to come to fruition, faster to come to fruition. And we're looking to evolve the org in how we do these execution of these programs as we go forward. What we're looking to make that happen is still trying to do the same type of technology demonstration, right? Working that into the cislunar environment, all these demonstrations, going to the moon and demoing many of these on the moon for all the sustained lunar presence that we're looking to be part of, and which STMD, Space Tech, is leading as part of the lunar infrastructure in the Blue to Mars blueprint objectives. And then the ones that translate to Mars use the moon as a proving ground to do the advancements so that it sets it up for missions to Mars. So we're still doing the same aspects of it, but we're going to kind of do it in a different organizational structure. And on the top of this chart, you kind of get a sense of where we're adjusting our program structure into these functional domain areas, 5 of them. Space transportation, space to surface operations, surface infrastructure and exploration, in-space infrastructure and discovery, and foundational capabilities. So we're looking to have the same types of advancements. We're looking to do it, but do it in a organizational structure that goes from low TRL all the way to high TRL. And so within one domain, that domain would be responsible for doing the life cycle of that TRL from early to all the way there, as opposed to our previous structure that we have been in, where there needed to be a handoff between a mid-TRL to a high TRL program or a low TRL to a mid-TRL program, which resulted in some slowness and aspects of it, but also some barriers to make that happen smoother, given how we can do this, right? And in some ways, we had a pilot that we were already doing this with our small spacecraft technology program, which did this low TRL all the way to higher TRL flight demonstrations within its own program structure, and it was fairly effective. And so going forward, we think that this would be a model that we will use to try to do all the technology demonstration we want going forward with this aspect of it. The next slide kind of talks about how we're looking to restructure in terms of the layout of the organization. Still doing the national tech base, right, for us, but in these 5 domain areas, go, land, live, expand, and explore as the short moniker for the 5 functional domains. Within each, we've identified capability portfolios that are responsible for the particular technical area to bring to fruition the technology and capability maturation. So in each one, there are many capability portfolios that have identified, total 24, that will look to develop the roadmap, the strategic plan, the roadmap of what it needs to get developed through the various TRL mechanisms that we have to make that fruition. Each domain area will be responsible for that entire lane there. So how we're looking to migrate is, instead of going to a vertical structure in our programs previously, we're going more to a horizontal structure going now to do these tech developments in that aspect of it. On the bottom, you see the catalyst innovation mechanisms. So many of the tools that we've had in the past of our other programs are going to help leverage to enable the tech maturation that's going to occur within these domains and those capability portfolios underneath them, right? Many of the same similar things that you're familiar with how we reach out to academia with our space technology research grants, how we looked for early stage ideas with our NIAC solicitations and our early career initiatives to come up with some ideas. Prizes and challenges like we've always had, SBIR program from a small business, utilizing tipping points and ACOs that many of you are familiar with. So those all will be housed within this catalyst grouping that will help support all those domain areas and the capability portfolios to execute on those demonstrations that we're looking to enable for the tech maturation from that. The catalyst elements will also be integrated and embedded into the road mapping process that every one of those capability portfolios are initiating right now. So within each one of those capability portfolios, a technology roadmap development is underway to develop what it is that we need by when, so that we know what technologies to invest and the time phasing of them, right? And that kind of leads into, as I go in a couple of charts to Alesyn, of how we go to choose what we go about investing in and the prioritization of those things. So given this structure, a little bit more on the catalyst mechanism itself, as I mentioned, it's going to provide the avenue ways to be able to do these tech developments, especially for people external to NASA, through all the different mechanisms we have, from contracts to funded space act agreements, our ACOs and tipping points, flight opportunities for doing those aspects of it, and the grants and cooperative agreements that we typically have done as well. And so we will rely on this support structure through Catalyst to help the domains be much more functionally focused on the technical demonstrations, and then going into doing the demonstrations that it need as it go forward. My last chart before I hand off to Alesyn is, so the way we're looking to exercise this process is a publicly, transparent, rigorously developed process where we identify the shortfalls. And earlier this year, you participated in this first incarnation of the shortfall. We identified 187 are the problem statements that we, as a community, feel we need to address to enable the outcomes we would like with the missions within NASA, between the Human Spaceflight and the Science Mission Directorate there, as well as all the external commercial activities that are going on from there. We are using that to whitewash against all our stakeholder inputs of what they think the priorities are, right? And with the ideas that come through from the idea generation that we identified in the previous chart. So mapping of those two will help us identify which ideas and how many of those shortfalls those ideas will capture, right? Given that, through this prioritization process that will be handed on to Alesyn shortly, it will give an idea of a ranking of these shortfalls, which ones bubble up in terms of priority of addressing sooner, and how we go about making those decisions as we go forward with input from all your community to help inform us on making these investments. We did this in a very quick turnaround in a couple of months earlier in the spring because we built off of what we were existingly doing. We're still going to be talking to all our internal stakeholders at NASA, human spaceflight and science, as well as all the external engagements we have with you all, with those conversations and discussing your strategic plans. But this prioritization process allows us to bring more metric-based aspects to our decision-making than we've had in the past. And so it's a way of marrying the qualitative conversations we've had in the past with more numeric-based process and linking the two together to help better inform how we go about doing this. And it's one way of improving upon where we have been to try to tackle the types of capabilities we need to enable as we go forward. With that, I will hand it over to Alesyn to walk you through the prioritization process.
All right. Good morning, everyone. It's nice to see you all here. I'm our Director of Strategic Planning and Integration in the Space Technology Mission Directorate. And we've been busy over the past several months going through a process to come up with the prioritized list that Prasun referenced here, and sort of some rankings to better inform us with some quantitative data as to where we should be making our investments. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the process we went through to solicit feedback from, I know a lot of you in this room contributed, which we're extremely grateful about. So for a long time, we've been tracking what we consider technology gaps. Things that we saw that needed to be invested in order to achieve our overall goals at NASA. And we had actually a list of well over 800 of those technology gaps. We actually went through a process to kind of normalize those and level set them to a level that we thought could be provided publicly, and that we could get feedback on and kind of a comprehensive approach. So we narrowed down, all the content of those 800 gaps was narrowed down into 187, what we're now calling shortfalls. and they're organized into 20 different capability areas. So the way we define a shortfall, or it's similar to a gap, it's an identified technology area requiring further development to meet future exploration, science, and other mission needs. We kind of evolved to using the term shortfall, I think under the recognition that a gap infers that you know the beginning point and the end point. And then for a lot of our endeavors at NASA and in space, you don't necessarily know the exact end point, but you do know that there's still work required to go. So we've kind of evolved to using that term. Now you can see how all of the capability areas that we work towards in STMD and how many shortfalls we identified within each of those capability areas there. Again, 187 broken out into the categories you see here. So in the spring, we embarked on an effort to solicit feedback on those 187 shortfalls, and we did that through a couple of different ways. We wanted to get broad feedback. We wanted to hear from individuals who have interest, vested interest in space technology, and so we wanted to, solicit feedback from all of our communities and all of our stakeholders. So we released both an internal and an external feedback opportunity, and we did that through an external site that hopefully many of you use, spacetechpriorities.org, to capture feedback from all of you who are not NASA affiliated. And then we launched a NASA Spark campaign, which actually we leveraged one of our critical programs, prizes and challenges in crowdsourcing, to help us develop both of those feedback efforts. To solicit feedback from our internal NASA workforce. And so the way that we asked for that feedback was in a quantitative approach to those 187 shortfalls. And we basically, asked everyone to submit what they felt was important to them on a scale of 0, 1, 3, 5, 7, or 9. 0 being not at all important, and 9 being critically important. We also had the option, this will be important as I go through the methodology, to not score. 187 is certainly a lot, and I know, not everybody has expertise in all those areas. So there were an option to submit NA for those areas that were not relevant to the individuals. So I think this is just a bit of an overview as to what we uncovered in the ranked results. The biggest thing is that these inputs are igniting meaningful conversations, right? Data is one piece, but the conversations you can have around data just make it, everything more fruitful. So they've ignited a ton of meaningful conversations with our stakeholders, and I hope there's a lot more to come so that we can make smarter investment decisions. So we plan to use the ranked list that I'll be showing here and do annual calls for feedback and use that as one of several factors to inform our projects that we invest in and our budget submissions, and have begun to use it for the FY26 submission that we're working internally in the agency. You can obtain the full ranking results. It's really a treasure trove of data at nasa.gov/civil space shortfalls. The full ranking results include our integrated ranked list and then all of the ranked lists by the stakeholder groups that I'll go through. Because we hope that this data can be really useful to all of you, all of the stakeholders beyond just ourselves in STMD. So the other thing is that we got a ton of feedback. I'll go through, all of the responses that we got, but all of the responses were included and valued in our assessment. There was no responses that we kind of, set aside and didn't work into, our methodology and approach for the results that we're seeing here. And we really do need the whole tech base as energy of innovation to deliver on these new capabilities. We can't even imagine today, which is why we went through this approach. So the ranked results that you're going to see here are based on that numerical scoring process that I showed on the previous slide. And they're not based on the open-ended responses. We had a few questions at the end of both surveys asking, did we miss any shortfalls? Are there solutions to these shortfalls that we may not be aware of? And we're still processing through that data. There's a lot of rich data there, and we expect that data to provide, one, context to our results, help us uncover additional shortfalls, and certainly help us inform how we do this process in our next annual update. So we're looking forward to continuing to dive into all that wonderful feedback. And when we have more information about the next feedback opportunity, it'll again be posted at nasa.gov/civil space shortfalls. And there is an email address that you can email us at if you have any questions, if you have any concerns about any of the rankings that are shown here. So in the feedback opportunity, it was open for about a month, mid-April to mid-May. We received 1,231 responses, which I think that we're really thrilled about. That's a pretty significant number. And it's actually more when you account for the fact that we received about 20 submissions from companies, from centers, that were more of consolidated submissions that reflected more than one person's input. So the number is actually higher than that. So you can see the breakout here from our external feedback effort. We got 462 responses. And then from our NASA internal effort, we received about 769 responses. And you can see, I think we had a wide range of industry that submitted, academia, other government agencies and FFRDCs. We got a lot of great feedback from our centers. We're really happy with the response rate from our own NASA workforce at the bottom. And then I'll walk through the process on the upcoming slide, but we requested one consolidated input for each of our mission directorates at NASA, and that's also reflected here. So those asterisks represent the areas that I was referring to where we had consolidated responses that reflected more than one person's input. So this is a breakout of the input that we received specifically from industry. We got input from 185 companies, and you can see there was a really good mix of the size of organizations that we received that input from, ranging from a lot of small input to medium and large companies, extra large companies. So really diverse in the size of the companies that we received feedback from. And then the top 5 sectors that we received feedback from for those companies were things I think that you would expect: defense and space manufacturing, aviation and aerospace, space research and technology, software development research services, and then a smattering of other kind of organizations like IT and consulting. So really, I think a great response rate from our industry partners, and happy to see the engagement there. So the way we went through this process was to basically bin the feedback into stakeholder groups. And I'll go through the next slide on the methodology, but we wound up with average scores for all 187 shortfalls by each of these stakeholder groups, and then applied predetermined weights to determine what you'll see as our integrated shortfall ranking. So on the internal stakeholder groups, this is kind of how we broke them out. We left Exploration Systems Development Mission Directorate as its own stakeholder group, given they are one of our primary customers, as well as the Science Mission Directorate. For the NASA centers, we binned them all into one stakeholder group. And then for other mission directorates, we also solicited feedback from Aeronautics Mission Directorate, from the Space Operations Mission Directorate, and then we put forward a response as STMD as well. For our external stakeholder groups, we broke up industry into 2 groups, one being large industry and the delineator there being greater than 500 employees. We also bucketed FFRDCs and UARCs into that group, and then broke out a small industry stakeholder group where it's less than 500 employees is the delineator. We had a stakeholder group for other government agencies, for academia, and then we kind of had an other category, which was a bit of a catch-all for anyone who submitted feedback but did not neatly fit into one of the aforementioned stakeholder groups. And a lot of these individuals were associated with nonprofits or professional societies, think tanks, or just the general public. So this is the process that we went through to arrive at our results using that quantitative feedback approach. So I'll start at the top of the chart here on the external feedback. Our first step in the process was to group all of the feedback that we received by organization. And in the cases where we had a consolidated response, we then multiplied that consolidated response based on a factor that kind of reflected the executive level leadership of that size of an organization. At that point, we took an average score for each shortfall for each organization. So every organization that submitted us feedback wound up with a list of scores for each of the 187 shortfalls if they chose to score each of them. At that point, we then grouped the organizations by the stakeholder group that you saw on the previous slide and took an average score for each shortfall by stakeholder group. For the NASA feedback, all of the feedback that we received through our Spark campaign, all of the individuals that submitted feedback there were grouped based on their affiliated center. And we did the same thing. If we got a center consolidated response, we multiplied that by a similar factor that represented kind of the executive leadership of that organization. We took an average score for each shortfall by NASA center. So each center wound up with an average score for each 187 shortfalls based on the individual input and the consolidated input if they chose to do so. And then we grouped all of that feedback into the NASA stakeholders group, like I showed on the previous slide, and had an average score for each shortfall for that NASA Center's stakeholder group. And then at the bottom of the slide, this is the process we went through for the mission directorates within the agency. Like I mentioned, we asked each of the mission directorates to submit to us one consolidated response. And that's what we used, their scores that the single response of scores against each of the 187 shortfalls. Therefore, you don't see the blue box there because there's not a need to average them since we only asked for one input. We did group ARMD, SOMD, and STMD together, as I mentioned, into the other mission directorate stakeholder group. And then again, Exploration Systems and Science Mission Directorate, we left as their own stakeholder groups. And then took average scores for the shortfalls for each of those three stakeholder groups, Exploration, Science, and other mission directorates. At that point, we had average scores for each of those stakeholder groups, and we applied predetermined weightings, and I'll go through our philosophical approach for those weightings. And that allowed us to arrive at the integrated rank shortfall lists, which I'm going to show here today and are published publicly at that website, Civil Space Shortfalls. So the average scores, so in addition to average scores, you're going to see data that shows rankings, like I said, by stakeholder group and integrated rankings. And I wanted to make clear to folks that those rankings are derived from, at the end of the day, the average scores for each of the shortfalls after we went through this process. The only cases where that's not the case is for Exploration and Science Mission Directorate. Since we had only a single input from them of scores, we asked them to go back and tell us what their rankings were. And they did so, and that's what's reflected in the data that we've shared. So this was our approach to weighting. We used weights that reflected, first and foremost, our primary customers and their demand for our future capabilities. That was our first priority. But we also know that it's critical. All of our other stakeholders play critical roles in partnering and helping us provide solutions for the capabilities that we're looking to deliver on. So the NASA inputs received, at the end of the day, received about 2/3 of the overall weight, and then our external scores received the remaining 1/3. Kind of happened to wind up with similarly, the number of responses that we received from external versus our internal stakeholders as well, but that is, kind of how the weightings broke out at the end of the day. And we considered the following tenets in our investment strategy, and these are reflected in priority order. The first one getting the highest weighting, and the sixth one getting kind of the lowest weighting. So our first and highest priority was to align with the administration and the administrator's priorities that address the blueprint objectives and Artemis. Our second highest priority was to focus on investments that support science priorities that are identified in the decadal surveys. Our third highest priority was to ensure we're fostering the creation and growth of the space economy writ large through partnering with many of you in industry and supporting small business innovation. Our fourth highest priority was engaging our NASA workforce to deliver innovative solutions to the nation's toughest technology challenges. Our fifth highest priority was to encourage transformative cross-cutting technologies that benefit all of NASA, including more than just the Artemis objectives, as well as other government agencies. And our sixth priority was to empower a broad base of community of innovators and academia, and a lot of that we do through emphasis on early stage investments. So kind of some observations about the overall ranked results. You'll see that the number one ranked shortfall in the integrated list was survive and operate through the lunar night. This one was in the top 10 across every stakeholder group. It kind of was far and away the highest priority, and you'll see that in the data. So that's, we were, happy to see that at the top of the list, the consensus recognition that that is a problem that we need to solve and need to place emphasis on solving. We also saw that there was agreement across all of the stakeholder groups that the top 5 shortfalls are very important, and I'll go through that in the next slide. But really, when you look at the top 30 shortfalls, there was relatively broad consensus for those as well. After you get past the top 30, it gets a little bit more mixed. Some stakeholder groups thought it was really important, others maybe not so much. But there was a really diverse representation of all of the capability areas that wound up in some of the top 20. I'll go through those here. There was, quite a bit in advanced habitation systems, in autonomous systems and robotics, a few in communications and navigation, and then a couple in power, avionics, nuclear propulsion, and then you see one each for cryofluid management, thermal management, and then sensors and instruments in the top 20. Some of the bottom 20 in the integrated list were dominated in areas like advanced manufacturing and non-nuclear propulsion capabilities. And I'll say that, some of the bottom 20 were more on the enabling side of our capabilities. They kind of enable some of the other investments to be successful, which is, something we'll need to consider as we go through our process. That, we're not going to necessarily, we have no intent to use this as the end-all be-all list where we have a cutoff line and we only fund X shortfalls. It's really important to use this as one piece of data, a very important piece of data, but there's a lot of logic and reasoning that has to accompany that as well, and to make sure that we're continuing to invest in a broad, diverse set of investments and enable, all of the things that we need to deliver on. The majority of the human exploration and science top priority shortfalls, which were kind of our highest priority areas, wound up falling in the aggregate top quartile of the list, and actually all but one or two of their highest priorities fell in the top half of the list. When you look at the NASA Center rankings, they were a little bit more mixed in the aggregate top quartile. But beyond the top quartile, the stakeholder priorities you'll see in the data were largely mixed and kind of aligned to their areas of interest and kind of what you may expect to see when looking at the different stakeholder groups. But a lot of the shortfall rankings within the capability areas span a very large range. Some of the shortfalls in a given capability area were at the top of the list, while some of them in that same area were at the bottom and in the middle. There was a pretty large spread for the majority of our capability areas. So this is a view of the top 30 shortfalls. So on the left-hand side here, you see the integrated rank, and this is 1 through 30. And we also have included the average score that shortfall received, and this is going to be from 0 to 9, since that's the quantitative approach that we used. And then on the right-hand side of the screen, you'll see the rank by each of those stakeholder groups that I went through. And so I think you'll see some of the takeaways I shared on the previous slide. There's a lot of agreement in the top 30. Apart from a few outliers, there's a lot of green on this slide, which means this was ranked highly in almost every stakeholder group's integrated response. And some of the areas that you'll see in the top 30, again, when we look at the top 5, it's survive and operate through the lunar night. The second one, high power energy generation. The third, high performance space computing. The fourth, autonomy or precision navigation and autonomy is number 5. And then as you go through, you see a lot of shortfalls in advanced habitation systems. You see one pop up in cryofluid management, and several pop up in the 20s in entry, descent, and landing. So I wanted to include a different view here for you all, and this is kind of the average scores by capability grouping across all the stakeholder groups. And again, this is just a view of the data. You have to dive into each shortfall individually. But we saw a lot of shortfalls within Common Nav rank pretty highly, as well as nuclear propulsion, dust mitigation, advanced habitation systems, cryofluid management as you go through the list. And then you'll see, as I mentioned before, when you look kind of at the bottom of the list, areas like advanced manufacturing, non-nuclear, excavation, construction, and outfitting. So that was kind of a brief overview of the results of all of that data. Again, wanted to thank everyone for their participation in this effort. We're super thrilled with the vast, diverse participation with over 1,200 responses. We've learned a lot through this process. I think we'll take some lessons learned for sure about how we do this in the future, but this has given us really good quantitative data, like Prasun mentioned, to supplement some of the conversations that still need to be had with our stakeholders. It's one piece of data, but engaging directly with our customers is still going to be a huge need for us to further dive into understanding their needs and making sure that we're delivering on them. So Prasun went through our new proposed domain-based structure, and wanted to share here that we have several sessions this afternoon where you can go and hear more about each of the domains. Go is going to be at 1 o'clock. And then we've got, I believe, expand shortly after that, followed by land and live. So we really encourage you to check those out in those locations this afternoon, to come and hear more from some of those folks doing the early formulation of those domain and capability areas. And I believe that it's over to you, Dan.
Okay. Well, thank you, Alesyn and Prasun. Thank you. And thank you for all the work that I know went behind the scenes to make that happen. So, and going back to the first announcement, I think some of us heard back at Space Symposium in the spring with Spuds putting up there and putting up with a lot of questions from a lot of people. So I know you put a lot of work in. So first question is, what's next after this? How do you guys see this working forward, and how this will be used from here?
So I'll start off, and then Alesyn can weigh in to add more there. So we do intend to use this to help our budgeting process, the investment going forward, right? We were already well into the PPB 26 process, so we kind of did our best to read the tea leaves of, we kind of all generally know, probably all in the room, what would rank up higher, but we didn't have the actual data to support it. So we kind of inferred some things. So directly, this data feeding into the PPB 26 is limited just because we didn't have the data until like 2 weeks ago, right? But we want to have this data available earlier in the budgeting process at NASA for us, for Space Tech. So by the spring, so we want to do this on a regular cadence. We're still figuring out what that regular cadence is, so any input you guys can have, that would be very helpful. Is it annually, biannually, what may be? And we want to have that prior to the whole budgeting process start, which typically happens in the February, March timeframe. So we would like to have a cycle finished prior to that point so that it can inform the whole planning process going forward, which we couldn't do this time around, right? So that's kind of how we see more of that going forward, in utilizing the community-based input to help inform what are the high priority things and how do we time phase certain things to make that happen, to improve upon what we've been doing in the past. And in many ways, I would say, you know, one of the things that the Science Mission Directorate has, which has been really great, is their decadal process to get the community all around what the priorities are. We haven't been able to do that to this point, and this is one of the things we've tried a couple of times over the last 14 years to have something analogous for space tech. And the shortfall process and the stakeholder input process, we think that it marries that type of approach to get a community approach to what we think the priorities that space tech should go after, just like science goes after the ones that are in the decadal. And in a large extent, that is what's going to help us as we go forward, not only to the internal process, but hopefully all the external engagements, not only with you, but with all our stakeholders in OMB and on the Hill, to help inform why we're doing what we're doing. And we have something to point to, where in the past it was conversations that we were using to do that, and now it's just much more rigorous and more, as we said, methodical and transparent so everyone sees it.
Okay. Alesyn, anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, and I would just add, that's a great overview of the plan for how we plan to do the shortfall effort in the future. I think as we look to the new construct that Prasun laid out, our next nearest step is to develop roadmaps for each of those capability areas and to use these lists to kind of inform those roadmaps. And I know that our domains leads will be talking a little bit about their thoughts there this afternoon on those. But I know that they'll certainly want to engage all of these communities and how they develop those roadmaps. And the data that we got out of this effort will be a great starting point for them to know what communities to kind of start engaging with as they formulate those roadmaps.
Okay, so there's one or two questions in here about roadmaps. So the roadmaps are to come.
Yes.
That's okay. Excellent.
Right. And I would say we're not starting from scratch per se. You know, we've had our principal technologists and system capability leads create a set of roadmaps previously from last year when we had these future Envision Futures that we built. So we're building off of those more from kind of how the blueprint objective process was architected from the right and lay it out. And so we're evolving that into that construct. And that is commencing basically as we speak, that we're starting that. So we hope by, as we go into the fall, we would have some draft ones that we would be to be able to assess.
Okay, good. Thank you. As you guys went through this data and you were doing the evaluation, I know you went in there, you probably had some thoughts of what would rank where. Any surprises? One, from my own personal background, cryofluid management, I thought that would have been a little bit higher. But surprises from your guys' perspective of what, because of your overview across the agency?
Why don't you start?
Cryofluid management didn't fall too badly. If you could look beyond the top 30, it's right there. Right after that, I think there was one in the top 30. Any surprises? I don't know that there were necessarily surprises with any of the shortfalls. I know that, one of the good things that I was happy to see about the results was that there wasn't just solely a near-term focus that wound up in the top results, right? There were still a lot of shortfalls that are very long-term focused on our needs for Mars, like nuclear propulsion, like high mass entry, descent, and landing systems, and like cryofluid management. So I was glad to see the diversity and recognition from the community that we shouldn't just solely be focused on some of the near-term challenges, and that we need to have a balanced look at doing things that we need specifically for kind of the lunar efforts, but as well as Mars.
Okay.
I'll just add, this was our first foray into this, and so we knew we've always said it was going to be messy trying to figure it out. So we know. On the shortfalls, some of them, as we've written it, as we were going through, it's like, well, that's not really a shortfall, that's a solution. We were trying to stay away from solutions. So we know we have an evolution of the shortfall list itself, right, that will go forward there to help do this. Did we miss some shortfalls? We got a lot of input that was character-based that we're going through, and as we go through the next cycle, trying to evolve those 187 to whatever the list comes out and be more consistent amongst each other, because we found inconsistencies at times of the level, or is it truly a shortfall, or is it a solution, or that. So we're going to go through that process to do that. So it was those types of things that I think we unearthed going through this process. And then the last aspect of maybe how best to give guidance to everybody, because everyone did it based on their way of thinking about it. And is there maybe try to give a little bit consistent guidance on how to approach it? Because the time phasing, as Alesyn mentioned, it was left to the rater, right, of how to do it. And how do we want to think about that, right, of time phasing of some of these investments? Because there is a need for that. And given, we don't have an infinite budget, how do we make that maybe a little bit more informative as we go forward from that regards?
Okay, one of the top questions here is, given the information you now have, how do you see this working with other technology development entities within the agency to assure that or to minimize, I'll say it that way, redundancy and overlap? And then also, I'm going to expand on that a little bit in terms of how does this help you start to work with Air Force Research Lab and the Space Force and other technology development activities? How are you guys looking at that now?
Yeah, so I mean, the list that we compiled, we tried to be reflective as much as we could, and like Prasun mentioned, we did it really quickly, but we did the best we could with the time, given that we wanted to, get this information as soon as possible. But I'll say, they reflected all of the civil space needs, or we attempted to reflect all of the civil space needs. And in some areas, we need to work with our other mission directorates to understand where they're making some technology investments in these areas and where we need to make some technology investments in those areas. Like advanced habitation systems is one where traditionally exploration has made a lot of the technology investments there, but they're showing up pretty high on the list, and we're going to have to dive into that with them to understand, what we should be working on and what they're working on.
Okay, let's see. We got a couple more minutes. As you guys make investments across the board and you're looking forward, how do you see? I'm using a little bit of moderator's prerogative here. How do you see the data and the results coming out of that, and how does that get communicated across the space community so that everybody can take advantage of the NASA investment? How is that coming forward?
I'm trying to process your question a little bit more there. So we hope we will be transparent in how we're making these investments so everyone gets to see it. I think one of the things that doing this more numerically based will help the whole community is to understand what we all think all laid out, right? Right now, it's conversations we have individually or maybe sometimes in groups and workshops, but we don't really see it all laid out in one place. And so I think there is a really great advantage about this process is that everyone gets to see where all this lays out, and then how each organization or entity fits into where these things are, right? So it helps hopefully make connections between not only government and external, but between externals and between government as well, of what their interests are and how it aligns going to that perspective. And then I think overall, particularly externally, in some of the conversations I've had, I think it helps external organizations, especially industry, how it aligns with their strategic plans and business cases going forward, right? So it hopefully informs everybody about, oh, if they're addressing this part, maybe we should go and address this other part, or maybe we strike a partnership. Hey, we want this part, you do that part, and we come together in a complementary way. So it's that quantitative aspect of having something out there, I think helps everybody get well informed of the lay of the land, and then you can start better conversations than years past.
And I'd just add, I'll give a plug for TechPort, which is our public site that actually STMD runs on behalf of the agency, that contains information on all of the technology investments that NASA is making. And it's a really rich database of a ton of information about the projects that are being invested in, what the outcomes of those projects have been. And so that's available to publicly for all the community to look at. But we use that data a lot as well to inform ourselves about where we're making investments, where we're not making investments. And we're in the process of assessing, what investments we are making in these against each of these shortfalls, and kind of where we still need to make some more investments as well.
Excellent, thank you. And I've saved the highest rated question for the end. What is the one main takeaway for the Ascend audience that you have about the future of the NASA space technology, given all this work?
So I would say, I think one message is we want to be involved with everybody, right? This was the reason for the shortfall and getting stakeholder input. I think it helps the whole community really focus on the challenges that we all see ahead of us and try to do them in a strategic way as opposed to targets of opportunity, right? May be able to plan things out better than I think we're able to in the past. And as we refine this process a little bit more and it settles out, I think that will lead to much more improved partnerships and overall execution being a much more on a faster cadence than we've had in the past. And then hopefully it all helps all our big stakeholders as the U.S. taxpayer of why we're doing what we're doing, and everyone in OMB in the Hill to help foster that aspect of that conversation.
Excellent, thank you. Alesyn, you want?
Yeah, I'd just add, I'm excited for the future. I think, the organizational construct that we're looking at, I'm hopeful that it'll help us, more effectively target our investments and make progress on our capabilities, easily, transition things from early to mid to high TRL, hopefully have a stronger connection with the customers at the end of the day. So excited about, the data that we got from this process, but just the future of space tech and this new kind of proposed construct as well, and being able to better deliver on our capabilities.
Well, I want to say thank you. We're out of time. Prasun, Alesyn, thank you so much for taking the time to come here and lay all this out for us, and we're looking forward to see how it proceeds. So please let's show our appreciation for Alesyn and Prasun.